Dr. Tim Spector, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
So, you're a professor of epidemiology at King's College London. You're also one of the world's most cited scientists and co-founder of Zoe. You've written a number of books. We won't go through them all, but I'm sure we'll touch on them as we talk. And you've really been a part of this microbiome revolution. You know, you've sort of pioneered some work in this area, starting with the Twins UK registry, which helped reveal how our gut microbes influence health outcomes. I'd like to just start off with hearing what are the sort of the early findings that convinced you the microbiome was really so important, and what was the most surprising thing?
Great questions. Yeah, so I got into this about 2011 when we got our first results on the microbiome. We'd been studying twins, as you said, and I'd having been studying twins for about 25 years by this time, I was used to everything being highly genetic. So identical twins would share most of everything. You know, it was really hard to find things they were different for, particularly as they have the same genes in every cell in their body, and they share home environments up to the age of 18, gone to the same school, same food, same mother. You know, they're like an experimental animal, really. Nature's a natural experiment of humans. And so the first thing I wanted to do was to test how genetic the microbiome was, and expecting it to be quite strongly genetic, like most blood tests, like most of the things you could measure in the human body. There has to be some genetic component. So the first thing we noticed was that wasn't true, that the gut microbiome is very individual, and even identical twins only shared about 25% of their species. 75% would be totally unique to them. And that was a bit of a wow moment when we first found that, because it just went against everything else that I'd been looking at in hundreds of papers and hundreds of different diseases. We'd always seen this major similarity. And that really got me thinking to say, well, if the gut microbes are different and they produce these different chemicals, because gut microbes are a bit like mini pharmacies, you know, maybe that explains why identical twins don't always get the same disease, why, you know, one dies of one thing, one gets depression, one's happy, one gets overweight, the other one stays skinny, in ways, you know, that then affect all of us, about why so-called diseases are a bit random when we all have quite similar diets, but different things affect us. And it also made me realize that there must be a big connection between, you know, how we're processing the same diet very differently and leading to different health outcomes. So that was the first thing I noticed. And the second thing was a few years later, we'd started to do this big intervention studies, giving, when we started the company Zoe, we looked at 1,000 twins and gave them identical meals. And we saw that the food they were eating had a very different effect on people, even identical twins, so that, you know, the same muffin had a tenfold difference in blood tests for fat and sugar in different people. And that, when we realized that, was pretty cool in itself, because it just meant, you know, one size doesn't fit all. We're all very different. And it turned out the microbes were explaining quite a lot of that difference. So linking the microbes to, you know, not only being different, but how we respond to food differently, I think they were the first two big things that got me super excited in this field.
Okay. So I'm interested to know the identical twins, you know, sharing the same genetics. Of course, they were given the same diets at the beginning of the study, but what I imagine is that their microbiomes were quite different. Their gut microbes were different entering the study. Did you measure that?
Yes. Everyone had gut tests. But so in a way, what we did using that study was the basis of personalized advice on behalf of Zoe, the commercial company, was to look at 1,000 people, work out how they responded to food, and see if we could predict it from the data. So predicted from the glucose monitors, from the blood test we did on the fats after meals, their height and weight, age, and their gut microbiome test. So we put all that together, and knowing that, we had an algorithm that we could use on anybody else to say, okay, all things being equal, we think you're going to respond badly to sugar, you're going to respond badly to fat, or vice versa. And so that's what we achieved with that. It was a baseline study that we then applied to the 300,000 people that have since done the Zoe test, having their own personalization, so that people are very different. I respond very differently to eating a croissant to my wife. I can't touch them. They just send my sugar sky high. She can seemingly have 2 or 3 without problems, which is really annoying.
It's not fair. Okay. Super interesting. I think it's quite sophisticated to get down to personalized nutrition. We can get more into that in a minute, but I want to know, Zoe recently published research identifying sort of microbiome clusters linked to inflammation, heart health, cholesterol. So can you explain what these are, and what do they reveal about sort of what's living inside us? What do these microbes look like?
Yeah, so we published this really important paper in the top science journal Nature, and it was of over 30,000 people that had all done the Zoe test. So we had their gut microbiomes, we had all the other data, clinical data, etc. And we first proposed a new way of scoring for gut health. That was the basis of it. So up to now, we've been using something called diversity, which is the only way to assess whether your gut is healthier than mine is to say, well, how many different species do you have compared to me? Mm-hmm. And that's been the gold standard for the last 20 years, really since we started testing microbes. But it's rather crude, because we don't know whether you might have, 800 species, I have only 600, but you don't know whether your ones are good ones or bad. You might have extra ones because you like Kentucky Fried Chicken, and therefore you have certain microbes that only eat fried chicken, which isn't necessarily a good thing for you. But so it was a very crude measure. It's worked pretty well, but it's got its limitations. It doesn't work in trials. So we got a brand new way of testing it, where we looked at these 30,000 people. We looked at studies across the world and found that there were 100 microbes that everyone has to some extent. So they're common to everybody. So there's a common denominator, because we have lots of unique ones, but we also have these common ones. So we found the common ones. We saw they were equal in all, across the world in different populations. And then we got the ones that were linked to good or bad diets, and they were also linked to good or bad health outcomes. And so that was this top list we had, which are the most influential microbes we've all got, and then worked out a ratio of good to bad. So that's the new headline scoring system that we've now got, which we call a sort of Zoe health ranking, which is a good way to describe your gut. So it's much easier now for me to compare with you if we did test ourselves to say who's got a healthier gut. So you might have more gut microbes that are associated with good diets that improve when you eat good food and go down when you eat bad food, and vice versa for the bad microbes that you don't really want. So that's the baseline. And then below that, we looked at clusters of microbes that we knew are important for the immune system and inflammation, both good and bad. Clusters that were good for metabolism, clusters good for body fat deposition, and so these were subtypes of that total group of good microbes. So that way we could look at different aspects of your gut health as well. So we're sort of drilling down into it, and each time we look at the gut microbiome, we're able to go a bit deeper. And it always gets more complicated. That's the other thing. So there's always this trade-off when you're trying to do a test for the public between the incredibly complicated science and producing something that's practical and useful to individuals. We have to summarize it more. So, I mean, in the US, there are about 7 companies doing gut testing. Most of them have sort of 40-page printouts of every microbe they've found that's pretty incomprehensible to anybody.
Right.
And, you know, most people I talk to who've done those tests are no wiser after they've had it done, because it's just a vast amount of data that doesn't put it in any context or isn't really based on science. It's just a description. So I think hopefully this is a new way forward, that we move away just from diversity, which we've had for 20 years, to something that's going to point people particularly towards overall gut health. And then, you know, say you want to look at your immune system, your immune health, you can start to track that. So that's the idea behind this. But we're going to keep evolving it and keep improving it. I think that's the other idea.
Yeah. Okay. So diversity is good in general, but it's not very sophisticated. When you go down and you look more in the nuance, certain microbes may be more beneficial than others. Others may be even harmful, right? And then you're saying they have different functions, and they may indicate different, maybe nutritional issues, different dietary needs that could change. I want to hear a little bit about, you know, how did you go about sort of distinguishing between the correlation versus the causation? Are there any risks that some of these microbes are really reflecting something about the person's health overall, rather than necessarily, if you change the microbiome to be this way, it will make someone healthy?
You're absolutely right. It's a mix of causation, correlation here. And big problem in this whole area of microbiome research is knowing, you know, chicken and egg. So our main headline results are cross-sectional, which means we can't tell whether it's just because they're like that, they're unhealthy and they have these gut microbes, or the gut microbes made them unhealthy. The only way you can get around that is to do longitudinal studies, where you see if people have improved their diet, did these ratios of good microbes go up or down, which suggests that there is an element of causation there. And also you can do these animal studies, stick them in mice, for example, germ-free mice, and see what happens when you give sterile mice these microbes. Does it make them healthier or unhealthier? So that's generally what we did. And we did have about 3 or 4 trials where we had given people interventions, for example, with whether it was just the Zoe diet, using the app, you know, to get people to eat more gut-friendly foods in general. We also did a prebiotic study with our Daily 30 prebiotic, and that improved these microbes much more. So we knew that the ones we'd identified, we could improve or get worse in trials. Yeah. So although it's an element of both, I think it clearly shows that there is a causal element to it.
Mm-hmm. And there's probably little downside to sort of increasing these that are associated with the positive health outcomes, right?
Yeah, I can't think of any reason that they would be bad at all. No, that's right. So I think we're fairly safe.
Okay. So you talked about prebiotics. So just for the listener, the viewer, if you're not familiar, there's prebiotics and probiotics. Prebiotics are these fermentable fibers that sort of feed the gut microbes, right? And these probiotics have the microbes themselves. And they, from my understanding, they don't necessarily increase as much the actual diversity of the microbes in the gut, but they do have a lot of potential benefits to, anything from reduced inflammation to better digestion or gut health. So can you tell us a little bit about the difference between these two and what you see as sort of what's the most important role from where people are to get the kind of gut health in optimal shape?
I think we need to see them as complementary rather than competitive. I think we should be looking to have both prebiotics and probiotics in our diet. And the way I like to think of it is a prebiotic is like a fertilizer. It's a very broad fertilizer for many bugs. You can have fertilizer that's very specific, like a sort of just nitrogen or whatever it is, and that might be, say, just having chicory root inulin or some very specific fiber, or you can have a broad range of fibers, which is what we've come up with as our prebiotic and the one we tested, which is this. I don't know if you've seen this, the Daily 30 mix, which is 34 whole food plants that provides fiber, but importantly, it's diverse fiber. So each plant has hundreds of different fibers. We don't know much about them, but the key is giving a broad diversity, because we don't know what our microbes really like to eat at the moment. It's a bit like an unknown zoo, you don't know if you had one food to give all the animals, you want to make it as broad as possible. So that's the sort of current thinking. So we've gone for the broad broach prebiotic, which we tested in our trial called the Biome trial, where we had 320 people in 3 arms. One got a dummy, a breadcrumb mix that they put on their food. Another got our prebiotic mix they put on their food, and the third got a probiotic, a lactobacillus, which you buy from the drugstore. Lactobacillus reuteri, which has been shown to work for a number of conditions, including some anxiety and depression, and works very well in mice as well. And it turns out that they work in different ways, but both the probiotic and the prebiotic improved gut health, according to our score, although we've got about a 9 to 10-fold more benefit from the prebiotic than the probiotic, purely just on the gut health.
Right.
And there might be other benefits of probiotics, but it doesn't seem to affect the gut health as much. And other studies, not our own, have shown that probiotics in fermented foods, which is my favorite. When we talk of probiotics, it can either come in a capsule or a jar. In a drugstore, it can come in food, like yogurt or cheese or kefir or kimchi, kraut, etc., where you get many more species. And studies have shown from a big study from Stanford 3 years ago showed that it can reduce your inflammatory markers by about 20-25%.
That's right.
If you take quite small amounts very regularly for a couple of weeks. So I think it looks like they work in different ways and are complementary. But if you're just looking at what improves your gut health, probably the prebiotic. I've changed my mind. I now think a prebiotic is a if you could only afford one thing, it'd be the prebiotic.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm hearing you that both matter, the probiotics and the prebiotics. Trying to get them from food is important. There's a lot of potential diversity in those in the probiotics, right? I'll have yogurt.
Yeah, food is always going to be better than the tablet. I think you just get much more variety, you get bigger numbers, and let's face it, it's more interesting to eat food than some pill.
Yeah.
It's more
There's
tasty.
a lot of other There's a lot of other compounds. There's a whole food matrix in there as well that's different from a sort of extracted ingredient that's put into a supplement. So, diversity of, there's dairy products like yogurt, kefir, cheese, but then also these fermented vegetables. And to clarify for people, it's not necessarily those pickles that you see at room temperature with just vinegar. We're talking about live active cultures. So it's, the Bubby's pickles in the US, they have these fermented just with salt, right? And spices and water. You have kraut, you have kimchi, those types of things, right? You have even carrots and other vegetables that you can do. So then combining this with these prebiotics, you have a mix, but you could also just eat a diversity of plant source foods. The different fibers feed different microbes, and we don't know exactly how it works in the specifics. But in general, I think one thing that's interesting is to know that sort of the diversity of different types of fibers is helpful. So sort of the diverse diet in general is a good way to go to get sort of a more diverse, a healthier microbiome, gut microbiome. So now when you get into the specifics, so you have people using this app, right? They get a test telling them something about their microbiome. How do you go about giving the specific sort of personalized nutrition or diet recommendations? Does it tell you which foods to eat more of beyond a general sense? Because you already have sort of for the general public health, you can say eat more of these types of foods, less of these. But for individuals, do you have any surprising results where for some people, one particular type of food is really what they should focus on, for somebody else, they shouldn't?
Well, we've changed our mind on this over the last 8 years as we've got more results, because very early on there was a feeling that, certain carbs would favor certain people, and that some people, got the same result eating a cookie and a banana. We don't think that's true anymore. There are these personalized results that some people can handle fats much better than others. And so some people can eat unlimited amounts of cheese, really, and nuts, etc., and never have any problems. Others might have a threshold, in which case, they, after a certain amount, they start to get inflammation and other problems. So that's basically what we're doing at the moment. Is from our tests, we're able to say whether someone should be penalized for eating lots, say, for example, rice or bread, much more than others. So on the example I gave my wife, I might get a French baguette, for example, and it scores 15 out of 100 for me, right? This is something I should be having only rarely, because each time I get a massive sugar spike, she might get a score of 40. So she could have it in moderation. It's that sort of level of, so it's not like this is marvelous for some people and this is terrible for someone else. It's a continuum. It's a nuanced thing, but it means that, perhaps 60% of the advice is fairly generic, and then you've got layered on this level of personalization, which, we're getting better at, but it's still evolving. It started fairly crude, and each year we're getting better at pointing it out, and we'll be able to offer more specific advice about particular foods linked to certain microbes. For example, if now we know the 50 good microbes we want to cultivate, which we recently published on in this Nature paper. Most of them don't have names. We don't know anything about them, right? They're really newly discovered, so we need to do some studies to work out what they like to eat. And once we do that, we can start personalizing more closely on your gut scores and trying to tease out. At the moment, our advice is relatively crude, but it's getting better all the time. So I think that's where the future is going. But all these studies take time, need huge numbers of people. We've now got 300,000 people in our studies. And it's only then that we're making these really big discoveries. Good science does take much longer than just marketing. So that's the interesting lesson. But I think people realize in the US, you can now download an app for free, the Zoe app, and start playing with it today. I don't know how long it's going to be free, so it'd be good for people to test it out. And that gives you semi-personalized advice. You can put in your blood tests. So you've had a annual blood test at Quest a year ago. You can put them in, and this will give you semi-personalized results, particularly lining up your how good you are at fats or sugars, and based on that, will give you some scores that you can start to use, even without a gut test. So I think that's a useful starting point. And of course, you remember that the point of this is not just to personalize your food. The whole point of Zoe is it's a we're a gut health company, but we're trying to make people eat better long term. So essentially, these are all tools to get people eating better long term, transform your food choices into healthy ones in an environment that is a complete nightmare, of confusion and misinformation. So we can get wrapped up in the science and the detail of the microbes, but essentially we want people to make good food choices and make it easy and fun for them. So that that's the main philosophy here. So the app helps you do that. You can take photos of your food, so that we have a AI, a validated AI tool that tells you exactly what's in it, how many plants, for example, you're eating every week. Whether it's fermented food, you can track your protein and your fiber. All these things make it much simpler than just a couple of years ago was possible, where you used to have food diaries, and I don't know if you've ever done those, but they're so boring. They are the worst thing to do. So it's lovely now. I just got into the habit of taking pictures of my food, and it tracks it, and just the act of doing it makes you eat better, because you just think about, just for a few seconds, what you're eating. Which is the opposite of what the food companies want you to do. They don't want you to think at all. They just want you to sit on that couch in front of the TV and just, get it down, or in your car or whatever it is,
Yeah, I totally agree.
So it's an antidote to the food companies. That's really where we're heading with this.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes it more mindful. And even, for me, listening and talking about health and nutrition makes me also more sort of mindful of the choices I make.
But it's difficult. It's hard, and things, and the science changes. That's the other thing. So that's the other, just keeping up with the latest advice is really tough. And so, that's why we need these tools. You go to a supermarket, how do you know what to buy? Really tough. So it's, you haven't got the time to read every label on every packet,
or understand the labels. Yeah.
Or even if you can read the tiny writing, that's right. Yeah. So that's why these apps like this are really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Now, one of the challenges, I think, people who are sort of on the lower carb or the animal-based diets, even if they're trying to eat really healthy, maybe keto, things like that. One of the things I hear, one of the obstacles or the sort of criticisms of fiber, because I think it's hard to criticize fiber from any sort of public health sort of evidence-based grounds, because it's so positively associated with so many different beneficial health outcomes. But I've heard a lot of these sort of fiber, too many grains and legumes or nuts and seeds can make me feel bloated. And there's sort of this challenge. I think there's probably to do with the microbiome, but if you start going from a low fiber diet to having a lot of these fibers and prebiotics, it can feel in the immediate or the short term, it can feel kind of like you don't feel as good necessarily. You may have some bloating. Do you have any insights into, one, is that how common is that? Do you have that among the users? And then what do you do about it? Is it just sort of about sticking with it and gradually increasing over time, or are there certain things that you can do about it?
Certainly, a lot of people talk about it. Our experience is that it's not as common as people think. So maybe 1 in 10 people have problems when they are going from a low fiber to a high fiber diet. We tell people routinely, go slowly, because the worst thing you want to do is to put people off, a transformational, life-giving change because of a few weeks rushing it. There's no, we're trying to get people to change for years and decades. And so it doesn't matter if they take weeks or months to get there or years. I think that's the important thing. And when we've actually done trials where we ask people about bloating, we see more people actually improve their bloating problem than actually get worse. You get people reporting both, but what we're often seeing is this anecdotal report of people say, "Oh, I took this, yogurt and I got bloated and I gave up." But we did a big study of 9,000 people taking fermented foods for 3 weeks, and I think it was 15% of people had reported more bloating, but 40% reported less bloating. So, people haven't always looked at two sides of the equation. So for every person that gets worse, there might be people who actually are instantly feeling better.
How about
doesn't get reported.
With the fermented foods? That makes sense to me. I think on the fiber, the prebiotics, thinking of sort of legumes, say legumes, beans, lentils in general. Have you done any trials where you look, or at least gathered those sort of data as well? Do you see the same pattern where more people get improvements versus the people that experience worsening bloating?
Only by giving them the overall Zoe diet. So we're not able to break it down into those particular components, but we score things like legumes, lentils, beans very highly.
So people would probably get more of those in their diet.
They'd be getting more, but because I think a lot of it is because we're emphasizing diversity. So we want people to have 30 different plants a week. It means that any one item, like, pinto beans, for example, is going to be a small part of that diet. I think the problems occur when people go crazy on one particular type. Whereas if there's kind of small amounts and they're varying it seems to be less. But generally we just say, if you're getting some bloating, getting some gas, just go slower. Just have less, there's no rush in this. But your body will get used to it. So it's not been a major problem. We've not seen dropouts from our program, for example, because of it. People realize that it's not a race, and that if they don't have those microbes, in their gut, they are going to be overwhelmed if they suddenly get, 3 cans of beans a day to process. But if you give them small amounts and you're varying it with other stuff that they may be more useful, then it seems to be less of a problem.
I love the framing of this as it's not a race, it's over the long term, because you realize that really the health benefits are about what is a long-term diet that people will stick to. And so that's sort of the goal. You don't need to rush into it. And it's also encouraging to hear, if you kind of look at sort of trying to get a diversity of these different foods, you're probably going to have a better time than if you go for just one, like you're just eating the black beans, or you're just eating lentils, for example. So I think that's encouraging. Hopefully people who have any challenges with that can try that.
I think we need to move away from this, transform your life in 6 weeks, and you're going to lose, 20 pounds and you'll be a better person. That's rubbish. It's about changing your habits short term so you can make health gains long term. And I think that's what it's all about. So it is about patience. It's about realizing that, you should be looking at all things. We're obsessed with weight, but so much of our studies, we show that the first thing people notice, whether they're on fermented food, Zoe diet or the prebiotics, the first thing, we didn't used to even test it, is improvements in mood and energy are the first things to come out. So that if you're actually thinking about, gosh, could this be affecting my brain and my tiredness levels? If no one's ever asked it, you're not going to think about it. And, when I was a practicing doctor, we were never taught to ask patients about mood and energy. It was like, oh, you mustn't, that's a can of worms, never go there, don't ask them. But now you realize how important it is and how part of the feedback loop it is. If you, compared to 2 weeks ago, I've changed my diet. My brain is much clearer. I'm not as tired. I never thought tiredness was associated with diet. And so this, to me, that's one of the big revelations. And it happened a bit by chance. We just threw in a few questionnaires and there it was, coming up even before gut changes. We were seeing the effect on the brain.
I find that one of the most motivating aspects of eating well is how I feel and how I sort of can function. And so having the energy, sustained energy, having good cognitive function, to me is a big, strong motivator, especially when I associate it with the foods that I eat. So, broadly speaking, though, you wrote this book. One of them was called Food for Life. I think you had a cookbook as well, where you put this sort of science into practice and you lay out 6 overall principles for eating well. And you talk about pivoting protein sources, not really calorie counting. Can you walk through these different areas, kind of the big main components of how do you sort of get to a healthy diet?
Yeah, sure. So these are all gut-focused messages that people can remember that, this general concept. Number one is try and eat 30 different plants a week. So you get diversity of plants, as we discussed, not just the same beans every day or the same kale. It's variety you need, and getting above 30 seems to be the sweet spot in our data, but 40 is probably even better. And it's a nut, a seed, an herb, a spice. They all count as plants. Even coffee is a fermented bean and therefore counts as a plant, a very healthy plant, actually. Second would be eat fermented foods, ideally 3 portions a day, small amounts, but regularly. Help your immune system, suppress inflammation, important for your gut. Third would be eat the rainbow, so that you're picking foods on your plate that are going to look great. And they're full of color, those bright colors, the blues, the reds, oranges, signify defense chemicals called polyphenols, which used to be called antioxidants, which are really good for you, but also they act as a fuel source for your gut microbes. And if you think the other signals of polyphenol-rich foods are bitter tasting ones, things like extra virgin olive oil, red wine, dark chocolate, coffee, broccoli, they all have really high levels. Then think calories. Think quality, not calories. I think is a real. We at Zoe are totally against any concept of the calorie. Is just not useful in nutrition, which is borne out by probably most of the nutrition scientists nowadays. Have abandoned realize calorie counting doesn't work, and it's a terrible way of describing food. So you do see so many shoppers picking items from the shelves because they say they're low in calories. It ignores all the other things about food that you should be looking for. You should be looking very much at the quality of that food as much more important. Whole foods, a million times better than some low-calorie food. Pivot your protein is another one we go for. That there's a lot of talk about protein in the US at the moment. 90% of Americans have got plenty of protein, but 90% are deficient in fiber. So maybe get your protein from a high fiber source like beans, lentils, legumes, etc. Think more broadly than just having another steak. I think so. You have other advantages for your gut health if you are interested in keeping your protein levels up. And then we've got give your gut a rest. So we're quite big fans of intermittent fasting, time restricted eating in particular. So you're not changing what you eat, just make sure your gut, like your body, gets to sleep at night, repair itself, and there are metabolic advantages and gut advantages to that. And finally, avoid as much as possible the worst ultra processed foods, the really high risk ones. And the app that I mentioned allows you to scan foods to say which are the worst 25% of ultra processed foods, because they're not all bad. But if you focus on just eliminating the ones that are designed to get you addicted, you can eat in seconds, that have horrible additives that mess up your gut, then you're doing pretty well. So
yeah,
they're the broad rules, and if you follow that, you're pretty much guaranteed to improve your gut health, which will improve your general health.
Yeah, I think that all makes a lot of sense, and I think it's about how do you get there. Many people aren't consuming those types of diets. So the app is one way. I think the Zoe app, especially since it's free right now, you can get a lot of utility from the free version. You mentioned coffee. I want to know a little bit more about what does the evidence say about coffee. Every other week it seems like there's a study or there's a journal article, there's some sort of news article saying coffee is great for you, and then something that says coffee is not good for you, right? What does it do to the gut microbiome, and how does it sort of impact health?
Well, I've been studying coffee since the 1980s, and originally then it was thought to be terrible and cause cancer and heart disease, and everyone was told it was bad for you. And it's gone through various shifts over time, and currently the epidemiology view, based on summarizing all these little studies and some big studies of millions of people, is that it's drinking 2 to 5 cups a day is beneficial for heart health and reduces your risk of heart disease and stroke by about 20 to 25%. And that's accounting for confounding factors. So that's pretty convincing evidence, and even reduces heart arrhythmias, which is thought to be the problem that coffee induced. So now coffee may not be for everybody. It does give people the jitters because of the caffeine, but it's probably not the caffeine that's causing the benefit. It's the polyphenols, these other defense chemicals, of which there are about 600 or 700 in the coffee itself, many of which we don't understand, that are causing these benefits, and they probably are affecting our gut microbes. And we wrote a paper describing a particular microbe that came out of the database that only eats coffee, called Lawsonobacter. And we think this microbe then produces other chemicals that are helpful for our immune system or helps our heart in some way. So it's a lovely lesson that, some things that were demonized in the past, now we understand the gut microbiome, and we start thinking, well, what is coffee? It's a fermented bean. We used to think it was bad because it contains a nasty chemical called caffeine, which is, an addictive substance. But it also contains all these other things that are incredibly good for us. And it also is a source of fiber. So if you have, 3 cups of coffee, as the average American does, that's probably they're getting most of their fiber from coffee. And, it's more than you get in a small orange juice. So once you start looking at food through the lens of the gut microbiome, you get a very different view of it. And I think this is part of why we need to revise all our thinking about which foods are healthy, which are unhealthy. It makes it much clearer, really, because then you're forgetting about macros and fats and calories, which the food companies want us to talk about, and you talk about things that, how whole foods really are good for us through the lens. So there's many other foods like that where we've changed our minds, but coffee's the best one, and it looks like decaf works probably as well.
Okay.
So
So
for
if you
those
want the
people,
less less caffeine, you can go decaf, huh?
and things like matcha, which is made from green tea, is probably nearly as good as coffee, according to these studies as well. So green tea, matcha, coffee, they're all real health drinks. They should be in the health section. Things like the orange juices and the smoothies should be, in the toxic section.
Yeah, I think it's surprising to me to hear that there's fiber in coffee. So that's one takeaway. I think what you highlighted is that food contains so many compounds that are not on the label that people don't really notice, right? You said just coffee itself having hundreds of these polyphenols, and all foods, contain this sort of food matrix as well. You have usually thousands of compounds that have some sort of effect, and we don't understand it all. So I think it's important to really consume these whole foods and get the benefits that bring them. You mentioned,
and you can't, which means we can't reduce it to just. It's like, we look at an orange or a lemon and we say, okay, what's good about that? Vitamin C. Okay,
right.
I can get all the goodness of an orange just by taking a vitamin C tablet.
Right.
That just shows what nonsense this reductionist idea is, and how the supplement industry is based totally on these concepts that you can just pluck one at random and then sell the shit out of it, and then that's fine, and tell people you don't have to have the real food.
One of my favorite examples is beta carotene. I think was sort of used as this supplement, kind of promoted as this is going to have all these health benefits. But when you look at the evidence, the foods that contain that high amounts of beta carotene, these carotenoids, have beneficial effects, but the actual extracted single isolated compound doesn't. And that's pretty commonly, it's not probably across the board 100%, but that's generally what I think we see, is that the whole food sources have the better health benefits than the extracted compound.
Yeah, and they're probably meant to be healthy in the context of the original structure as well. And the body was designed to break it down, and we're geared up. It's a bit like calcium. We extract calcium from many foods, and quite naturally and healthily. But if you give it as a big, tablet of a 1 gram blob of it, it probably increases your risk of heart disease, because we're not meant to be taking it in that form.
Yeah, and there's synergistic nutrients and compounds that also interact when you have these foods, when you eat them. So, fully agree. You mentioned ultra processed foods, and I think it's great that the Zoe app highlights which ones are the worst offenders, so to speak, the worst 25%. Can you just highlight for us? I think most people understand, like, sugar sweetened beverages like sodas are pretty much universally agreed about being harmful. Can you just walk us through some of the worst offenders that you're aware of?
Yeah, so what we used as our rules for doing this were, firstly, what other people have proposed, which is just a list of additives. Okay, so there are some apps on the market that just look at the additives and say avoid ones with lots of additives. But some of those additives are very harmless, or might be beneficial for you. So we took only those additives that are known to be harmful in humans from trials. So they get a bad mark. Then another category was for hyperpalatability, which is this concept that food companies are trying to make foods that override your fullness signal, so you keep eating them. And they're not natural mixtures of compounds, and what they've done is they combine fat, sugar, and salt in a perfect formula that just tickles your brain and lights up the reward centers. So these are things like potato snacks or Doritos or something, or some cookies. Often they contain sugar and salt and fat in just the right amount that you just keep eating it, even if you don't really want to, even if you're not hungry. Then you've got, then the manufacturers also create ones that are designed to be eaten super fast. So they just dissolve in your mouth. So like a Pringles, for example, would be a good example of something that virtually you don't have to chew it. It just melts instantly. And all you're getting is the chemical flavors. And then the other category is not only they're fast, but they're delivering a lot of calories in a very dense way. So that unlike normal plants where you've got lots of fiber and structure to it, you're just getting the starch bits directly there. So this is how the food industry operates. And so what we've done is taken their tricks and scored the foods according to that. And the worst ones basically have all of those categories in them. And low risk ones might just have, one additive that has been suggestive to be bad, or one has is slightly hyperpalatable but is otherwise healthy. So that's how we ended up with this 4-point scale. But it's surprising how many bad foods have all of these factors in it, and of course, the additives are particularly bad for our gut microbes. That's the emulsifiers, the glues, the gums, the artificial sweeteners, and some of these colorants and other things have toxic effects as well. So, but there's a real great gradient of risk, I think, in these foods. They're not all equal.
Yeah. I think the additives oftentimes get a pass when people are sort of thinking about ultra processed foods as the only harm they do is they cause you to overeat because they're hyperpalatable and they're calorie dense and you eat them rapidly. But I think some of your work and others has shown the additives, the emulsifiers, colorants, they can actually disrupt the gut microbiome, right? And there are these independent probably risks or harms from those compounds, even if you're not overeating the foods. I think that's something that people may not be fully aware of as well.
Yeah. And you're depriving the gut microbes of fiber generally. So
you're displacing them. Yeah.
You're just starving them, basically. They've just got nothing to eat.
Yeah. So, okay, last thing. I know we've been talking for a while, but I wanted to get your take on another area that we've touched on briefly, but haven't gone into depth. So the gut-brain axis is an ongoing area of research. You mentioned food and fermented foods can affect your mood or cognition, right? How does the sort of gut microbiome influence mental health, and how strong is the evidence currently?
Well, the evidence is pretty strong. So every mental health condition that's been tested has shown abnormal gut microbes in the guts of sufferers, and some of that, as we discussed earlier, could be consequence, but there's some longitudinal data appearing, particularly in kids, showing that disrupted gut microbes leads to more behavioral problems later in life. And there's a whole raft of animal studies showing that when you take stool samples from, say, anxious or stressed into humans, put them into mice, you can make those mice anxious, and you can do the same experiments by stressing mice, meaning they can transmit some of those behavior aspects through the gut. So I think that it's pretty clear you can the two are correlated, and we know that the gut communicates with the brain through a number of ways, but we have this vagus nerve, and our second brain is in our gut, and it actually formed in evolution before the brain. So we started as a gut, and then our nerves grew around it, interestingly. So it's pretty important to us. And the vagus nerve is this huge nerve that runs from our gut to our brain. And we used to think it was a way that the brain would, tell our gut what to do. Like, when we're anxious or frightened before an exam, it would make us go to the toilet. It turns out 80% of the traffic is from the gut to the brain. informing the brain what's going on in the body. And we now believe a lot of mental health issues are due to erroneous signals coming from the gut. So if the gut is inflamed, such as people eating, a standard American diet, lots of junk food, or are stressed, or have other problems, that will send messages to the brain to say, tickle the immune system and get that moving in a way that it wouldn't have done if it wasn't getting those signals. So nearly every mental health disorder is now associated with some degree of gut inflammation. And I think it's really interesting. This is a whole new area of psychiatry that's unfolding, that mental health disease might just be an immune reaction of the brain to what's going on in the gut. And if you can cure the gut, reduce inflammation, reduce that stress, then I think we could improve most mental health disorders. It's really interesting. And it comes back to these observations that we've seen in the Zoe studies of how people have really improved mentally just by changing their diet in ways they didn't really dream of, because it's not been something that we talk about much. We think about mental health problems as, oh, well, it's the way you were brought up, it's your genetics, it's some event that you can't really control. And I'm sure it's not simply diet, but things like diet are such a major influence that everyone can actually change. It seems crazy that we're not doing that. And there are now trials of, say, gut-friendly diets versus antidepressants for depression, showing it works as well as antidepressants. And some studies show it works better. And they've also got studies of probiotics in mental health disorders. Fermented drinks can help some mental health disorders as well. So, it's a relatively new area of science, but it's everything is pointing in the same direction. So I think we're going to see much more of this in the next few years. I think it's going to be a really hot topic, particularly with explosion of mental health problems in young people and explosion in dementia in old people. If we can influence that with diet, that's going to be a huge effect.
Well, I mean, all the more reason if we didn't have enough motivators, I mean, other reasons to consume a lot of diversity of fibers and probiotic foods. So last question is around bowel cancer. So you've also looked at the science linking gut health to increased rates of bowel cancer, even in young people. And I'm interested to know, what are the biggest dietary risks for bowel cancer, and what should people be aware of?
Well, the older literature pointed to lack of fiber and alcohol as the sort of main ones. At the moment, particularly for young people, we don't really know the epidemiology between why rates in people in their 30s and 40s have tripled in recent years. This is something that was incredibly rare and is now becoming quite common. So the new ideas are that this has happened not because of genes. It must be something that's happened across the world. It's not just in the US, by the way. This is in Europe and Australia, Canada. Lots of places. It's probably due to this generation being exposed to ultra-processed foods for the whole of their life. So this is the generation that had baby food that was ultra-processed. They might have had formula feed. They went to school. They had just ready meals, ultra-processed snacks, and just have massive, rather than occasional trips to fast food joints. It's now basically a key part of their diet. That's one of the current theories, but it could equally be a combination of factors such as exposure to pesticides. It could be microplastics is another potential theory. it could be living in urban environments and having lots of pollutants that weren't around previously. So he's trying to work out what's changed in people in that time. And but my bet is that diet's going to come out as the strongest one, and it probably does this by affecting the immune system. So the key to the microbiome is understanding that it is the main driver of our immune system, and our immune system is the main defense mechanism we have against cancers. We're all getting cancers every day at a micro level, but our immune system is killing them off early. If our immune system is distracted, it is going off in all directions, it's inflamed, it thinks we're ill, it's fighting those ones, it's not doing its main job of fighting cancer. So that's my theory about where we are, because levels of inflammation in young people have never been higher for a variety of reasons. And it's not a healthy state to be in.
Yeah. Scary, these rising rates of everything from cancer and diabetes.
It's a scary world, but we do have some of the solutions, which are quite easy and cheap to do. So, it's, I think the healthier people will get healthier and the unhealthy will get So as people, educated people learn what to do, we're going to, that's the danger here, that we will separate.
Yeah, I think the basics are really simple. It's hard to get that to reality with the population because there's so many driving forces that are holding people in the status quo, but really just shifting diets from these ultra-processed diets to more minimally processed, diverse foods is probably the number one thing we can do. So I appreciate
getting people to cook. Getting cooking back on the school agenda as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Vital life skill.
Yeah, I agree.
To keep you healthy. If you cook, you're going to be healthy. Doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah, very true. Okay, Dr. Tim Spector, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been great. Thank you.